everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks, the podcast at the YouTube channel where your host, Carolyn Haynes, discuss films with creatives in the film and television industry. And today I am joined by Andrew Morgan, writer and director of his latest feature film, Samantha Rose. And before we get into the film, I'm going to ask Andrew just to say a bit about himself and the film, and then we'll get into it. So, Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to talk to you. I am a filmmaker. I cut my teeth really making documentaries for a number of years. And this film's really special. This one is almost, it's a scripted feature, as you say, but it's made with a cast of first-time actors. And we really developed it together during the pandemic. And we shot up in Northern Oregon on location, and what became a really, really, really special process. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun to get all the way to this point with it.
Yeah, so this film is, I think, because we've been in the pandemic so long, starting, I would say probably, people think probably the end of 20, like beginning of 2020, but I actually think 2019 is where things really started to go off the rails because I remember it was at Sundance in 2020 and like we were hearing news about people getting sick. And then by the time I got back to Toronto, like I was hearing about friends who got sick and they were like concerned. And people weren't actually going out before then. And I think there is a shift in the film industry at that point. Is really interesting to see how the pandemic has created this shift and this change in not only how we see the world and how we're experiencing the isolation and quarantine, but for you as filmmakers, like so many films are have to be made during the pandemic. Filmmakers have no choice but to be making films during the pandemic. Creatives have no choice but to continue creating during the pandemic. And it's like we say the world stopped, I would say probably like for 4 or 5 months when everything was just completely shut down. But then there came a point where everyone was like, we got to start moving. We got to start moving slowly. And for you, that you're moving slowly and getting back into that rhythm was creating this film. And I like reading in the press notes, it says you had productions that were halted, but because those ones, I guess you weren't fully in control of that. You were just like, I'm going to take control of something that I can take on, that I can do and create this film. So tell me about the process and the idea of creating this film in the pandemic and moving forward for yourself as a creator.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that so much. It's been a wild ride, and it does feel like it's been a lifetime inside the pandemic at this point, as you say. Yeah, I was in production on a documentary that, as you say, got paused. It was a international documentary, so it just wasn't possible for so many reasons. So when that got paused, we hunkered down like everybody did, as you say, for a number of months, and there just came a point where I just really wanted to make something, and I had a lot of friends and collaborators that we work with that were similarly, they were on TV shows or different projects that had been halted, and there was just an opening. There was a space where I felt like we could make something. I took a drive up to a friend of mine who's a winemaker in Northern Oregon, and spent a couple of days kind of driving around the Columbia Gorge area there, and sort of fell in love with it visually. And I also, when I was there, I remember thinking like, this is such an incredible place to set a film, and came back and started having conversations with my wife, Emily. And really the conversation, I think for us, started around all the way back in high school. We would make these short films on the weekends that were, we'd pull all our friends into them, and nobody was getting paid. And they were overly earnest and romantic. And there was lots of music, and probably in the shadow of like Cameron Crowe or John Hughes or all these things, And we just kind of had a conversation in our kitchen over breakfast of like, what if we could recreate that feeling? And what if we could pull together a really tight team? What if we could write a story that intentionally takes place mostly outdoors and in this kind of world where we could control the environment and make it in a really safe and fun way? And we did that. We wrote that story pretty quickly, and I went to a lot of our friends and collaborators and invited them. And then I had known Sam Rose, who plays the title character. I had known her kind of through a friend of a friend, and we sat down and started talking about it. They fell in love with the idea, and then they kind of pulled in a lot of their friends. So a lot of bandmates and folks who, work together in restaurants, and they really became the core cast. And it was special because, no one had ever made a movie before. No one had ever acted in a film. And we got to go up there in this tiny little town and sit together and kind of rehearse stuff and work on stuff, and stuff I'd written, they made better. And we just kind of played around with it. And then we shot the film, and we shot it very much in like a documentary sort of style. Like it was fast. We didn't have a lot of time, obviously didn't have a lot of money. And I got to say, for me, it really did something profound. I think it brought me all the way back to that original feeling I used to get when we would make something, and before it got complicated, and before it was a job, and before it was all these layers of seriousness, you know. So yeah, the film did a good thing for me, and it honestly, I think through the whole pandemic, it was kind of the thing that got us through creatively.
Yeah, I think for a lot of creatives and for a lot of people, like finding something that makes us happy and like takes our mind off of everything that's going on around the world is has been something that the pandemic, I hate to say, but I wouldn't call it a silver lining, but it's something that made a lot of people like gain a bit of perspective about things, about doing things that matter. Because like for instance, if before we would have said, okay, I don't have time to do this, I have to push this back, like, you know, there's bigger things. But then for a lot of people in the pandemic, they're like, the world is going to hell in a handbasket basically, and they're like, and you're like, I need to do something for me, I need to do something for myself, whether that's doing photography or taking up a new hobby indoors or starting a YouTube channel, kind of like me, you know, or watching more films and reading books, or you know, like discovering communities online. Like for a lot of people, like Twitter and social media has become like almost a saving grace for a lot of people, because it's allowed people to reach out and to connect with each other. And I think for a film like this, I remember when I started the film, I was thinking, "Whoa, this seems like such a dream," you know. And like you talked about Cameron Crowe, it did kind of give me a bit of those films from like the 70s and the 80s, where you a lot of those films, especially filmed in North America, was just about people driving through the countryside, you know. And the film is very reminiscent of that, and it has like this very almost dreamlike quality, and this kind of like take your mind away from what's going on thing. Because I noticed the film does not reference the pandemic at all. It's like the pandemic does not exist. So could you just tell me about that aspect of the film and why you made that a choice? Because yes, it was filmed during the pandemic, and like you guys were very careful about making sure the set was safe and like everyone was
Yeah.
safe. But what was the reason behind kind of like creating this almost, as I said, kind of like dreamlike quality, but isolating the characters and the story from the pandemic itself?
Yeah, it's fascinating the way you just said that, because one of the unexpected experiences for me during the pandemic was, I think I definitely slowed down. The year before the pandemic, we were traveling, and I was just incredibly busy. And I think for really, if I'm honest now, like many years now, had been really operating at a pace that was borderline unsustainable. And the pandemic definitely it quieted things down, and I felt it inside of myself. Like I started to think back to memories, and I started to think back to like that time in your life where you're growing up and you're making sense of stuff. And it was really interesting, because maybe it was from watching more movies from that time, but I just found my mind like drifting back to that place. And when we started thinking about the movie, we started thinking about it like a photograph that you find in like a dresser drawer years from now, and it's not perfectly clear, it's a little smudgy, and you're like transported back to something. And that is what we wanted the film to feel like. We also, yeah, to your point, like we wanted the film to feel like a break. You know, I've made a lot of things that are very serious and very heavy and very, you know, quote unquote important. And this one, it was almost like we sat down to say, let's make a film that's just got some heart and some soul and could give someone a couple hours of a break. Because I really love that in movies. You know, I have gone looking for those types of movies during the pandemic where they've got an incredible soundtrack and I like the characters and I just like hanging out with them. And it gives me a little reprieve from everything else that's in the news. I mean, I think like there's going to be a time and a place for a lot of movies to help us understand what we've just lived through and what is actually happening. But I also think there's time and place for those films that are sort of a beautiful escape, you know?
Yeah, no, it's necessary. I'm like from Sundance, like one of the first films. No, I'm sorry, not even one of the very first film I saw for Sundance, 2021, and it was covering everything from home. I was in the same breath. It's a documentary by Nan Fu Wang, and it's an amazing documentary about she traced like the beginnings of the COVID-19 pandemic from Wuhan to like present day to the time that she shot it. And the thing is, I watched that when as I had COVID. I was in my bed, sick. I was so sick, and I don't know why I chose that film as my first film to watch for the pandemic, but I was in tears, and I told myself, and it was just like, and then as I was watching the film, I said, you know what, it's important that I watch this first, so that I get all of these emotions. Because I think the way how I would have experienced other films throughout the rest of the festival would have been completely different if I had maybe watched the film during or after, like at the end. I was like, you know what, let me just get all of the heaviness associated, my personal association with this pandemic and this virus out straight out the gate. And like watching films like this, I think it's kind of the same thing. Like there's gonna, like you mentioned, there's gonna be films that are gonna be heavy, kind of like in the same breath, and there's gonna be other films like that focus on like there was other film like during South by Southwest that focus on relationships that developed and broke up during pandemic. Like there's going to be so many films that are going to be about life in the pandemic, right? And I think it's important that we do have films like Samantha Rose, where we kind of like remember life before the pandemic in a sense, and like what life, and like finding ways to experience life during the pandemic that isn't about the pandemic in a way.
Yeah, well, it's like it's interesting to remember that like life was full of complexities and difficult choices and big feelings
Mm.
before the pandemic, you know. That it's a really complicated thing to be a human being. And pandemic or no pandemic, it's the road from being a child to becoming an adult is fraught, you know, and it's poignant and it's beautiful and it's powerful and it's painful. And yeah, there's still a lot of space for stories there for sure. I can't believe you watched that while you had COVID though. That's
I
so wild to me.
my sister, I was self isolated in a bedroom, but my sister was at the door. She was like, "You okay?" Because I was like crying, I'm bawling my eyes out. She's like, "You okay?" I'm like, "I don't know why, but I picked this film as my first film."
Wow.
And I was
Wow.
like, and then at the end, I was like, you know what? I think I made a pretty unintentionally brilliant decision, because I was like, let me get all of this heaviness out of it. But then I watched Mass, and that's a whole different type of heaviness. Um, but like talking now about you, like there's still life going on during the pandemic. Things, people are still like developing relationships, and one of these things is one of the things being discussed in the film with Samantha Rose and her relationship with Taylor. And I find this film, like the dialogue to me feels very natural. Like people have like absurd discussions. Like I have these kind of absurd discussions with my friends too. And so just can you tell me about finding the cast first? Because I think Sam Rose, who plays Samantha Rose, who plays Sam, but I first of all, tell me about naming the character and the film after after the lead actress. I think it's, I was just like, because when I was reading through the credits, I was like, wait a minute, Samantha Rose and Samantha Rose. Like, just tell me about the story, and then casting her, and then like and her
Sure.
reaction to say, I'm gonna name this film after you.
Yeah, well, no, that's why I was trying to make it as complicated as I could for people in your position. No, we started thinking about the story, my wife and I, and kind of broad strokes, we were kind of filling in what it could be. I sat down with Sam, and I fell in love with Sam as a person, and I really developed a lot of the story with them. Like we had a lot of conversation where they would send me different pieces and parts of their story. Like there's a lot of parts of this movie that are real of them as human beings, and that could be like specifics, like I speak French, I can balance something on my head, or it could be really big things like I'm a musician, like I write and play music, so it was really fun. That's why I say at the beginning, like it was kind of a combination to me between the scripted work I've done and the documentary work, where it felt very truthful to me. It felt very honest. Like I would write a scene, and then we would all work on it together. And as I say, like many times they would say, I don't think I would say it like this. Could I say it like that? We absolutely. We also, so I found Sam first. I fell in love with Sam for the part, and kind of built the story with that in mind. And then Sam really introduced me to everyone else in the cast. And it was interesting at the beginning, because it was like, at first it was like, well, okay, Sam's never acted in a movie before. Maybe we should put other people around Sam that are like, and the more we got into it, it just felt really, really natural to have this group of people who knew each other in real life and had played in bands together and taken trips together. And so we did a lot on Zoom. And then once we got all in the same room, yeah, there was a real life to it. There was a real electricity to it. And then when we shot it, we got to shoot with two cameras. So when I say it was kind of a documentary style, it was fun because the style of the film gave us the ability to not have it be locked in where like every piece of coverage had to be exactly the same phrase. So I think some of the honesty you pick up on is like, every take it's a little bit different and it's a little rough around the edges and it's a little messy on purpose. And then in the editing room, we were able to kind of cut it in a way that I hope feels pretty effortless. But it was fun. I mean, it was really fun. Like I think having done so much documentary work, I have a really hard time sometimes with films where I just don't believe the people who are saying lines, or lines sound like lines to me. So I think if there's any radar I always have in my head, it's like, is this real? Is this real? Is this real? And I think in this film, we chose real over better shots, or we chose real over a joke, or we chose real over, it's like that was kind of our compass the whole time.
Yeah, it does feel like, as I said, like the conversations feel very real. But and you talk about it being a bit documentary. If I wouldn't even really say more of a documentary, it feels more like a home video.
Mm,
And
it's
that it
great.
has that, it kind of have that whole video feel, especially the ones, those old handheld cameras from back in the day. I'm kind of aging myself, but like those
Yeah,
old
yeah.
handheld cameras, and so it has that quality about it. Because and then like I noticed like for in the film, Sam's her hobby and her dream is to be a photographer. So I kind of saw like a similarity between the way you shoot the film and the quality of those photographs. So I wanted to ask about that tie-in with regards to like just like technically and aesthetically, because like one of my first question was going to be, what is your personal aesthetic as a director? But then when I saw the pictures at the end, I'm like, this is kind of the same quality that I'm getting, giving me a bit of the Mamas and the Papas, that group, that band.
Oh man,
Yes.
you're saying so many things that I love. So I said earlier that the visual guide was like a photo that you found in a dresser drawer, but that idea of the film feeling like a photograph was a big deal. You say dreamlike, which I love. It feeling like a memory was a really big thing. Like the idea of when a photograph is developed and it has this quality that's two steps away from in person, like it has a really interesting veil to it. So even the framing in the film, the aspect ratio in the film, like the last film we had done was anamorphic, and this one's like totally the opposite. It's not 4:3, but it's on the spectrum towards that direction, all to kind of give it much more of a photographic feel. And those photos, I should say too, which I really love, Sam actually shot. Those are actually Sam's photos that you see in the film. So yeah, it's really it's fun to me. It has a very different feeling than anything I had ever done before. I think in the past I was way more focused on being really restrained. Like I didn't want you to ever feel the camera. I didn't want you to ever feel like it was a movie. Again, the last film was coming on. It was my first scripted thing coming off documentary stuff. So it was much more observational. This time it's like the camera is kind of a character and it's in there. And the idea is that you really feel like you're hanging out with this group of people, that like you're in the circle, you're not outside the circle, you're a part of the conversations, you're not watching the conversations. And I'm really happy with how that came out. I mean, it's extraordinary in the sense that like we didn't have almost any lighting. We didn't have, it was just very, very few tools on the table. And I think it forced us and helped us to be really creative with it.
Yeah. Yeah, because the thing with I think with films like this, where you do have where it has a very soft feel, and I think it kind of does help immerse you into the story more, like you said. And I think love that you said that it's kind of like a memory, because especially for people who are very visual, like our memories can have this weird like almost kind of like breaking the fourth wall aspect, like you feel like you're in the memory but it's not really yours. Well, that's kind of like how my memory works anyway. And
Mm.
it's kind of like that, is that you're looking at a photograph but you're still in the photograph at the same time. So the film kind of gave me that kind of perspective. I love kind of like sci-fi films where like that, where you feel like you're in the story because of like the aspect ratio and like how things are filmed. And then and talking about being in the story, I for Sam's story, I think there's a correlation. I think like Samantha did a fantastic job with the performance, because I found her progression as a performer kind of match the progression of the story. So can you talk a bit about directing her and directing the cast, because they're all on novices to acting, but I love how maybe it's unintentional, but that's kind of how I read it, where because the story is about her finding herself and like pursuing like being finding confidence in herself and being stepping away to what I would call a toxic parent who wants everything to be about her, and Sam is like, no, I have to find myself, and she finds love, but she finds her dream. And then as she's becoming more confident as a person, I noticed that Samantha's performance kind of becomes more confident as the film goes along. And so could you just talk a bit
Yeah.
about that?
No, that's so exciting. I totally agree with you. And I think the performance is really incredible. And I think looking at it now, it's amazing how spot on the performance is in terms of the tone and the place in the film, which is the hardest thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, you shoot movies out of order, and so part of my job is just to help kind of remind, like, here's where we are in the story. Here's where we are in terms of the scope. Because yeah, that was the idea, was that you find her at a point, at a place where she's really stuck and kind of what feels like at a dead end, and not in a great place when we pick up the story. And as it unfolds, I think you get to see more and more of the person emerge. I think you see more and more of I think being back where she grew up, I think being outside, I think nature plays a big part of that. I
Yeah.
think having love and support from Taylor and the friends that they're with plays a big part of that. And I also just think that freedom that comes when you're like away from your life for a week or two, like there's a reason why certain weeks can shape whole lives. And it's because there is a clarity, I think, sometimes that comes when you're outside of that. So yeah, I think you feel the character become more and more of a human being as it goes on in a lot of ways, which I really love. And yeah, all the cast. I mean, it was so much fun. I can't tell you how much fun it was, because it was like a group of people who all trusted each other. They trusted me, and there was just this spirit on set, which was like, look, there's a net, we're going to shoot a ton. I'm not going to make you look bad. Like, I promise, let's try a bunch of stuff. So it was cool to kind of try different levels, like on the comedic side, on the energetic side, on the, it was fun. And then they also get to do some great stuff where, like, that you see them the morning after, or you see them hungover, you see them tired, you see them like, so it was fun to play the whole thing. And frankly, I was just amazed. I mean, I was absolutely amazed at the natural talent that they brought to it. And again, being able to like shape the characters around them as human beings,
Mhm.
rather than making them come fit inside of a specific character, I think kind of opened it up to let me access and let us access as viewers, like the very best of what they had to offer.
Yeah, and do you think like naming the characters after the performers themselves actually help them with that, because they don't have to get accustomed to hearing themselves be referred to as a different name, which kind of would imply that they're a completely different character, but because they keep their names, it serves as a reminder of them saying, this is still me. I'm acting, but I'm still acting a version of myself.
Totally. Yeah, that was my goal. My goal was to just remove anything that was false that we didn't need to be false. So we worked with their own clothes for wardrobe. We worked with their own hairstyles for hair. We worked with, and yeah, the name just felt like they had great names. First of
Yeah.
all, I love their names. And I also just felt like, yeah, that's one less lie we have to tell every time we're rolling. That's one thing that we can just do to stay in our own skin and in our own space. So yeah, they were generous to let me do that. I like it a lot. I like that it's their names.
I like when sometimes that happens in films, are not necessarily I would say film, or like productions, where people do get to keep their names or something similar to their names, because especially I think for new performers, it just kind of reminds them to don't get lost in the performance or in the character, because as you said, because especially for a film I think like this, is because it is so much a part of, is so much about just like taking a step back and just like just being in the moment kind of thing. I think it's really cool that they got to keep their names as a characters, because I would if somebody started calling me by some other name, I'd just be like, what?
Me too. Totally. Yeah, me too.
So one of the characters that I really like, and performances I really like, is Luna, played by Natalia Ruiz Hennison.
Yeah.
And her character I think has a similar path to Sam. And there's a scene where they're both at a horse farm, and they're petting the horses, and Luna says something to her which I think made me kind of realize, okay, so like she's not acting as a guide for Samantha, but she's kind of telling Samantha something that Samantha I don't think even realized for herself at the moment, where she was just like, I'm retracing the steps back to the places that made me feel like myself again. And I think for me, I saw that as, and that happens like almost like I think halfway through the film, and I saw that as like Samantha herself didn't realize that she was on the same path or on the same journey, and I saw that as a moment where she was just like, oh wait, you know what? Maybe this is what I'm doing, but unintentionally and unconsciously. So just tell me a bit about just developing that part of the story and these characters, because each person I think offers Samantha something different for herself.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And that's how I thought about it too, was that each of these characters embodies like a different piece of what Samantha ultimately needs to discover. And so Matt Danger's character is very free. I think he's just absolutely free, unencumbered. There's each of them has that, and I think Luna more than most of them have that, especially because she's an artist and there's a really creative part of her path and trajectory. I thought it was. I love that you pointed. I mean, I really love that moment, and I love that performance for her so much. And one of the things I thought about a lot when we were shooting that scene was we always are in our own lives thinking we're the only people who have ever felt what we're feeling before. And then what happens with art is we get to step inside other people's shoes and we realize actually we're not that alone. And not only are we not alone, we are both more unique and less unique than we've come to believe. And I think part of what that scene was about was Luna, Sam can be so self-serious and she's internalizing all this angst and struggle. And Luna's just there to kind of point out, like, we're all doing this all the time. And by the way, like, we don't reach a point where we've arrived or we've discovered, like, we keep doing this again and again. And honestly, I felt like even writing that scene, that was a huge part of what I was even doing making this film, was I was like going back to where it began for me. I was retracing my steps. Like I all the time get to places in my life where I feel lost and I have to kind of look around and be like, okay, wait, where do we come from? Like how do we get to now? And by going back, I often find the inspiration that's missing or the heart that's missing but it's amazing, right? Like, it's amazing how much we do grow in circles rather than straight lines. And it's amazing how much we're all on the same spectrum in our lives constantly, of like, we grow and we expand and we discover, and then we forget and we lose sight of it, and and then we grow and we expand, and that's to me, I think that's why movies have always been so life-changing to me, is I think I have, there's an emotional catharsis to watching them. There's a safety for me. There's always been a safety in letting other characters experience something, and something in my heart is like, oh, I know that. Like, I know, or that character just put words around something I've been feeling for a long time. And then that's the greatest thing about, when you're in a movie theater, is you're with all these people and we're all feeling that thing. We're all like, oh, we've all been lost before. We've all needed someone to point out what we already knew. So yeah, I love that. And honestly, that scene, and that, it's funny you mentioned that line, because that really strikes to the very heart of the whole film for me.
Yeah, no, it's because the thing is, like, the film kind of mimics the path of that line, because like at the end she does pursue her dream. She becomes a photographer and she goes to LA and she's doing her dream, but then she goes back to Taylor. But then what the beauty I think about it is that she doesn't stay, her and Taylor don't stay, that he comes back with her. Because I think on far too often we've seen films like this where the woman's like, okay, I'm going to go back to my life, and this is where my real life is. I've tasted my dream in LA. I've gotten to do my art gallery and whatever, and I'm gonna go back to the Midwest, and thing. And I'm like, and then the other film, we kind of like flip that, and she's like, nah, Taylor, you're gonna come with me. You're gonna hop in my car. We're gonna go to LA. And it was just like, I love that. Like, he comes along with her. Like, she doesn't have to sacrifice her dream for him, because like when you really think about it, he himself didn't really know what he wanted to do. He was just kind of like existing there in Oregon with their friends, and that's something she does say, but she says it in a moment of anger, but it's also a moment of truth too, where she's like, you yourself are aimless. You guys are just here basically playing in the wild, and you don't have a true destination. And I think probably only, I would think, Luna and Viel have, like, they have a goal, like they're working towards a goal, where like the others are just gonna just like, oh, follow life wherever it takes us. But then she's just gonna be like, I'm gonna take you for the ride because you don't know what you're doing, so I'm gonna bring you along so you get some kind of direction yourself.
It's so funny how you say that, because there are so many movies where even if the female character goes and pursues a dream, and that's a huge if,
Mm-hmm.
it's treated as like 2 scenes and it's like cute. And then it's like, oh, I got that out of my system. I got the career off my shoulders.
Yeah.
Now I'll go fall in love. Yeah, we cut the ending to the film like 1,000 different ways. And it was such a delicate thing to figure out how much to do. But yeah, when we first started talking about the film at the very beginning in our kitchen with Emily, one of the images we had in our head was at the end of the movie, Sam would be driving and Taylor would be riding. And I think Taylor's character is really beautiful in the sense that I think he's a helper. I think that's who he is as a human being. And he exists to, I think a huge part of his purpose and fulfillment will come in being a helper for her. I think she does have a lot more ambition than him. I think she does have a lot more, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And what was fun was just like from a gender standpoint, all it was like flipping what we've seen 1,000 times, and it's cool to do that and to just kind of play in that space where it's like, we've seen the opposite of this for 100 years exclusively, So yeah, I love that image.
Yeah, especially the fact she got to do it in a Mustang GT.
Such a cool car.
Such a cool car.
My God, that car. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and it was just like again, like we talk about like these kind of scenes, but when you see like again, like just like you're talking about gender roles, just like for the fact she's got a muscle car and it's a car that she inherited, that it was her dad that gave her the car. And like again, in films we've seen is always about, and I think it's a very American kind of like way of thinking where the dad passes on his muscle car to the son, and in this time like he's gonna pass it on to Sam and she's gonna get to pursue her dreams using this car. And it was just like, yes, women love muscle cars too.
Yeah, no, it's so cool. I have 2 young daughters who were on set with us, and it was so cool the day that car rolled up, and they both looked at me and they were like, "That's Sam's car." I was like, "Yeah, that's Sam's car,"
I was just like, yes, for that engine, that big heavy engine. I'm like, yes.
So great. Yeah, it's so great.
Yeah, and so I want to go a bit into the technical aspects of filming of doing this film, because it's such like low budget, and it's like kind of like low stakes with regards to like there's not a lot of like heavy cinematography or editing. But I do want to talk about the editing because like you mentioned before, like films aren't filmed linearly. Of the very few, if it has something to do with like time, like About a Boy or something where like they film chronologically, most films aren't like that, and this film isn't like that. But like I mentioned before, I think like the way how you edit the film to show Sam's progression in Samantha's performance and the storyline. Can you just talk a bit about the technical aspects of like filming and then the editing process for this film?
Yeah, I mean, it's production's always wild, and you never have enough time. And as simple as this film looks in some ways, we are doing a bunch of stuff. Like it's actually, it's a bunch of locations. It's a fair amount of ground we're covering. We actually had a wild thing happen too in the middle of making the film. We had, I don't know if you remember last year, there was a bunch of those wildfires came into the Pacific Northwest. So we actually had to relocate in the middle of production up to Northern Washington and like rescout and keep shooting. It was incredible. I mean, it was like such a feat that our team pulled off logistically. But yeah, I mean, shooting was really fun. It was just really intense. I mean, I think we shot the whole film in 13 days. So it just has a pace to it that like nearly kills you. By the end of production, you're like, oh my God. And then you always go through a few months where you're like, I'll never do that again. And then you come out at the end and you're like, let's go do it again. Yeah. And then the edit was really nice. I mean, the edit always kind of feels like the therapy after production. I work with an incredible editor on this one. And, we were back home here in LA, and it was also nice because there was so much technically involved with like COVID and keeping everything tight and safe on set, that then we came back and we were able to have more time, and it was just us. We cut it from home, and it felt really fun. And it was, it's like that process of you really find the movie all over again in the edit. Things that you thought were going to work didn't work, and they force you to do new things, and those work better. There's a lot of, we shot a lot. So it was just constantly an issue of like keeping it tight, not having it just be like, this is not like a 3-hour epic, nor should it be. And then, another huge part of the edit was the music. There's an extraordinary amount of music in this movie. We've got longtime collaborator composer, Duncan Blickenstaff, wrote an amazing score. And then there's probably, I don't know, like 18, 19 placed songs from artists and bands, which was really incredible and technically very difficult, just in terms of like the rights and, you know, writing them letters, and we didn't have a huge budget. And so there was this whole process with amazing music supervisor who helped us pull it off. And we ended up getting like almost all the tracks that we wanted. And that was really fun too for the edit. Like a lot of the scenes are built around the music. So like we would get a piece of music and we would fall in love with it so much that it was like, okay, that's going to be the whole scene. So like there's a scene where they're walking down a train track and they're swimming at this river, and Matt jumps off of the train track bridge, and then they're talking. That whole scene takes place wrapped around this incredible song. And it was fun. It was like we would rough out the scene, but then we would get the song, and that would sort of inform so much of like the feeling and the pace and the whole thing. And then, as I say, like endings are always hard. So I remember we cut and recut the end a lot. And to be really honest, again, it was that song. There's a track by a band called Flip Turn called August that ends the film. And it was that song, I remember, that kind of unlocks that sequence. And it like helped us get from Oregon to LA and back to Oregon, and cover some very complicated like geographic ground in a way that I think kind of flowed. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I was gonna ask for the song because it's always interesting for me when the way how music is used in films, because like it informs so much of the story without the audience actually being cognizant of it, and that you just get the sense. And sometimes like I remember I spoke to a director and it was just like she was just like, I hope you have like 40 songs in this film. I'm like, really? Because I only noticed like because my brain was just focusing more on
Yeah,
like the sound design and stuff. But I find it sometimes is even better for films if like you're not always conscious of the song, because that means that it's not taking you out of the scene and it just
totally.
fits perfectly. So just could you just talk a bit about finding the musical feel you wanted for the film, because it has a very specific tone. So the film visually has a very specific tone, and then with regards story wise, so then just finding the music and deciding this is the type of music I want to go along with this film.
Yeah, it was really special to me. I mean, again, like I sort of grew up in awe of a lot of those movies that had just incredible soundtracks. I mean, one of my favorite things in the world growing up was to go see a movie and then save up to buy the soundtrack. That was like those two things went together. And I listened to so many soundtracks. And frankly, you know, movies turned me on to so many bands and so many artists growing up that either had come before me or I just wasn't aware of. So yeah, I mean, it's a feeling. This whole movie is a feeling. So everything that we're doing visually, everything the performers are doing, everything the dialogue is in service of, and then certainly everything the music is doing is to give you a feeling, to give you an emotional feeling. And some of it was like, what kind of music would these characters be listening to? I mean, a lot of the music that you're not noticing is they just always have music on. So it's always on at their place, in their cars. There's just always in the auto shop, there's a certain kind of music when they're hanging out. And then there's tracks that we place like front and center, obviously, that are a little bit more prominent. But yeah, it was that kind of feeling of like, of being young. It was the feeling of kind of like a little bit rough around the edges. Some of what I love about the music is it's like, we really went out looking for songs that didn't feel as like perfectly produced, that could sort of like sit inside this world that we were making, that kind of felt like it was like a Polaroid or a postcard or this thing that hadn't gotten quite finished. And yeah, it's fun. It's really fun to then hear some of the artists. Like we were listening a lot to Big Thief and Adrian Linker and Buck Meek. I remember when we were in production, and their tracks, you know, show up in the film, and they just feel like the voice of the character of Sam to me in so many ways. So yeah, it's like you can't separate it. It feels all part of it. And frankly, that's the magical thing. I mean, that's the thing that makes me so addicted to this process, is like you put all these ingredients in, like, you know, cinematography and wardrobe and obviously, as you say, sound design, which is a big part of this one. The music, the score, the songs themselves, the way you color it, and then you sort of reduce it all to one layer, and you don't think about it cognitively, which I love. Like I love that so much hard work goes in from this brilliant team of people that I get to work with. And then hopefully the feeling when you watch it is that it feels kind of accidental. It just feels like it kind of rolled out of the camera that way. And if that's the feeling, then I think it's been really successful.
Yeah, it should be seamless, because like at the like when I was hearing the last song as the credits was rolling, the first thing that came to my head is a Florence and the Machine song would fit in this track so perfectly.
Yeah.
And
That's really true.
yeah, and it was just, and I sometimes I to me is a mark of a great soundtrack, because if I can, the way I always think is that if I can picture or imagine another song fitting, that means that the song, like the film, has succeeded in having a very specific aesthetic, and it has having its own feel, you know. So like if I was to say, oh, I could hear, imagine hearing like a heavy rock song, I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense, because that's not the feel of the film. But as a group like Florence and the Machine would fit perfectly, because you achieved the tone that you set out to have.
I was listening to them a lot when I was writing. It's fascinating you said that. But yeah, same thing all the way through production. Like we have playlists on Spotify that I would send out to the crew and the cast, and I just had it in my head a lot. All those songs, you know, I was listening to them a lot while we were making it, and then you listen to them while you're editing, and end up having them in the film. I'm really proud. I mean, honestly, I'm really proud based on like the scope of this. The music that we pulled off is it was like a Herculean feat of licensing and generosity of spirit. Honestly, I mean, these musicians, these bands, like they did a big thing by letting us have the songs, and they, you know, oftentimes I'd send them the sequences, and they believed in what we were making, which is just really special.
And so just before I wrap up, so one of my last things I want to talk about, and I think it's something that you kind of like slip into the film, and it's not really made fundamental as a fundamental part of the film, but I think it's really something that a lot of people have been talking about, is toxic parents. And for Sam, her mom is, you like, all from the beginning, you wouldn't say, oh, she's a toxic parent, she's like that. But then like as the film goes on, you realize she's very dependent on Sam, and Sam has made her life about supporting this woman, and about doing everything for this woman. And the thing with the film, because it's talking about finding yourself, I think for a lot of people, especially if they've grown up looking after their parents, like they find it hard to stop being there for their parents. And like, you know, like and I'm kind of tying it into all the music and everything, is because like so much of life, I think, is about breaking away from things that hold us back, whether it's like finding a dream, or you know, or even our own insecurities, which is something that Sam is dealing. But then in her case, it's also about a toxic parent, and and breaking away from the guilt. So can you just tell me about adding that into the plot, because it's very subtly hinted, because one, we only see the mom at the beginning of the film,
Right.
but then as through conversations you realize that she is a very needy person. And like there comes a point where every child has to be like, you know what, I love your mom, but I gotta do what's right for me. So just talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fundamental. I mean, I think you said it beautifully when you say that the things that stand in between us and becoming the people that we were made to be, or you know, living out a dream that we were made to pursue. There are forces in our life that hold us back from that, and some of those forces can be wrapped up in really beautiful wrapping. They can seem innocent, they can seem wonderful, they can seem, well, of course I have to take care of this person, of course I have to. And honestly, I think what the film is really after in that regard is, and it shows up in the conversation that she has with her dad in the garage later on in the film, it's really about codependence, because codependence takes two parties to be involved. And you can look down at the person who's, you know, needy, or based on the role in the child parent relationship, definitely not acting the way they should be acting. But also, I think Sam takes a lot of comfort in that relationship. Like, we're really comfortable with what we're used to, even if it's abusive, even if it's destructive, or even if it's just low level, holding us back from the life that we want to chase after. So yeah, I think a lot of people have that experience. And I also think the experience of breaking away from that and realizing that you get to also choose your family. You know, you're born into a certain family, but you get to choose your family in life, and you get to choose the people that you're going to love, and the people that you're going to let in and be safe with. And yeah, that's definitely been a big part of my life. That's been a big part of Sam's life. A lot of the conversations that we were all having while we were making this was like, how do you love people while also not allowing them to hold you back? And frankly, with parents in particular, they know a certain version of you, and sometimes that version's outdated. Sometimes that version is like a skin that you shed, but they're still holding on to that. So I do think for Sam, that's one of the final things she has to let go of. That's one of the biggest obstacles that she has. And I think her biggest fear is more the fear of like, am I good enough? Like trying and failing, the embarrassment of like reaching for something more and not grasping it. And I think her mom is the thing she uses as like an out. It's like a safety. It's almost a like, well, And I think a lot of people do that. I think under the title of like responsibility, I think a lot of people stay far too connected to relationships that pull them backwards. So yeah, there's a lot there. You can make a whole movie there. And it was, as you say, it was kind of like we wanted it to be present and we also wanted it to be in the background because there just wasn't enough to be like, this wasn't the full movie about that. But I think you had to hint at some of those forces that were pulling Sam back to the person she used to be in order for you to see some contrast with what she ends up doing.
Yeah, because the thing is with parents is like they when we're growing up, they were saying, I want you to be independent, I want you to be strong, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. And then when you're just like, you know what, I will do exactly what you told me to do. I'm gonna be independent, I'm gonna go forth and do this thing that I want to do. And the parents will be like, but that's not exactly what I meant. I meant you to do that kind of in the framework of what I expected. It's like I want you to be independent in this particular aspect. I want you to go forward and reach your dream as long as it's not too far from what I want, from my own ideals. So it's kind of so like that. The thing about being a child and then growing up is something that we in the moment we never really think about as we were growing up. It's sometimes it's something that only occurs to us like as adults. We might have a moment of epiphany and say, yeah, like, wait, hold on, what's going
Yeah.
on here? And
Well,
like Sarah kind of has that kind of moment. She's just like, and it happens after an argument. She was like, wait, especially with her dad, which I thought was really interesting because she had all this resentment from her dad leaving, and then she says things which are true, but then her dad says, "But are you gonna keep doing this, or are you gonna go forward and do what it is you want to do?" And she had that moment. She's like, "Sometimes we do gotta walk away. Sometimes we gotta leave."
yeah, we constantly call things selfish that I just don't think are selfish.
Mhm.
And we constantly like we sacrifice parts of ourselves or parts of the gift that we could be giving to the world in the name of like some kind of responsible sacrifice. Anytime someone uses the word sacrifice, anytime someone uses the word responsible, uh, it's typically there's a lot of lies that are about to follow that statement. And yeah, you want her to be free. And honestly, that's I think her dad has gone through the journey that he's gone through with AA to a place where he knows about codependence. And that's honestly like I remember talking to several people who had parents uh, or siblings go through recovery programs as I was writing the script because I really wanted to kind of understand that headspace of codependence and like what that cycle actually does and what it feels like and what it takes to break it. And to break that cycle, you just have to sometimes say, you know what? I have to go do this for me now. And that's what you hear Sam say at the end. I love you. You're a good person. And this is part of my story now. And there's a chapter that's not going to involve you directly. So yeah, I love that moment. I always feel it's harder. It's harder than people think. It's harder. It's easier said than done. And to actually do that in your life is it's challenging for a lot of us, I think.
It is. Like for me, I moved my sister and I moved away from Barbados in 2009.
Hmm.
And like for me, it was just my mom was like, go to school and do this and do that. And I'm like, I'm doing this and do that. And then from the moment I said I wanted to be a film critic, I'm gonna drop my diploma. I got my diploma, and she was like, but are you sure? I'm like, listen to me, lady. Listen to me, lady. I am being independent. I am doing what you taught me to do. She was like, but I'm like, is this not what you taught me to do growing up? To be independent and be my own person. And it's just like some things parents do have to learn. We always talk about kids learning to stand on their own, but then like parents have to learn to stand on their own too. So it's just like, and I think the film is kind of like that. Is showing both the perspective of the child and also of the parent.
Yeah, well, and also like to your experience, and you so know this firsthand, Carolyn. It's like you have to leave home, you have to go. And for me, it's like I grew up, and after high school, I moved across the country to Los Angeles to learn how to be a filmmaker, and I had to create my own thing. I had to separate myself from something and go experience something. And one of the things you discover when you do that, or you do what you've done, is you realize it's really hard. It's really complicated and it's really, really worth it at the end. And I want more people to have that permission of go. Like if you want to go. You can always come back. The worst isn't as bad as you think it is. Go, like go chase after it, especially while you're in a season of your life where you're young enough to go
Yeah, for sure.
chances and try stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And thinking about it, I think Luna's kind of like that symbol of that for Sam because she's Costa Rican and she left home. She had a good job and she left home. She's like, I'm finding myself. I'm retracing myself back to who I was. And sometimes that doesn't mean going back home. That just means finding a new, I would say, a new type of home or a new type of space that you can retrace yourself back to who you were in the moment. Because like who we were at, and it's a discussion they have in the film, like who we were at 15 and all the dreams and ambitions that we had at 15 are not the dreams, are like they change. Like as
Mm,
teenagers, we don't think our dreams will change, because for one thing, we don't know how hard being an adult is. We have no ideas about the responsibility of paying bills, paying taxes, and all of this. And we kind of have this idealistic idea. And I think like for Sam, she realizes you can attain all of these things. You can have, and you can still have the ideal. You can still have the dream, but you're just also looking at it from a more mature perspective. I would say, yeah,
yeah, I couldn't say it better myself.
yeah, because life is hard. People take joy where you can.
It's hard, and I think that's one of the things that I think I am always after, and I think I'm especially after in this film. It's just to take it easy on yourself and to realize that being a human being is it's a complicated thing. We're not machines. We're not robots. We're these deeply complicated beings that it takes a lot, it takes a lot not to fall into ruts and not to stay in safe places and to keep going. So to anyone out there on the path, like to just kind of give an urge and an invitation to say, it's okay, keep going, keep going, keep going. Yeah, so I hope
Yes.
it is.
And I think that's the perfect place to end this, because it's just like, just keep doing you. What, just keep pushing on. And if people are going to tell you, think about it, and then keep doing what you want to, and then keep doing what you want to do. That would be my last message about it.
I love it. I love it.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for talking with me about the film. I really enjoyed it. The soundtrack is amazing. Everyone gave great performances. I'm so happy I got to see it. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
You got it. Thanks so much for having me. It means a lot.